Welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Same here, man.
So I went in to have a look at it all yesterday. It's all incredible. It's all kind of overwhelming. But before we get into why we should love monsters, how we relate to monsters, and a little bit more about the room, I want to ask about you. What was the first monster that really of note that really took you in?
Well, a very not a very prestigious one. When I was in the crib, I was less than 2 years old. My brother and I stayed late and watched a program called The Outer Limits, and there was an episode called The Mutant with Warren Oates, and there was this creature that was bald with giant eyes, and it scared me. I started screaming, and we shouldn't have been up late. My parents went out to dinner. My brother pushed me into the crib and zipped it. It has a mosquito net, and he zipped him in. And then in the middle of the night, he thought it was a good joke. He took one of my mother's silk stockings, put it over his head, and we had these fried eggs that you bought in magic shops, and he put them under the silk stocking, and it looked like two eyes.
Oh, good.
And he came, peeked over the crib, and it changed my life. I mean, it really, really destroyed my psyche, probably.
What do you mean it changed your life?
Well, because after that, I started having huge nightmares that were lucid nightmares. So I would go to sleep, I would fall asleep, and I would dream that I was in that room, and I saw creatures coming out of the closet, coming out of the rug. The rug was one of these shag rugs from the 60s. It was green, terrible taste in decoration my parents had. And it looked like a sea of waving green fingers. So I was afraid of climbing out of the crib, and I ended up peeing in the crib. My mother would punish me. And one night I stood on the crib, and I said to the monsters in the room, if you let me go to the bathroom, I'll be your friend forever. And I really started a kinship with monsters when I was in the crib.
I find it really interesting when you talk about monsters is you talked about them in sort of a veneration. You talked about them as saints. You talked about them as gods. I know you were raised Catholic, strict Catholic. I was raised Catholic too. So I know we both feel guilty just from having this conversation right now that we're not that we're not atoning for something. But what did monsters give you that Catholicism didn't?
Well, there's a sense of fragility and loss with monsters for me. There is a sense of acceptance. You know, they are not figures. They are not aspirational figures. They are sort of martyr-like figures. They represent suffering and a sense of being an outcast, and you know that I can identify with since I was a very young kid, because I was the quiet kid that looked but didn't participate. You know, I was incredibly thin. I was Rutger Hauer blonde, and I was incredibly quiet, and you know, that didn't sit well with all the other kids. So it was not an easy childhood, but eventually, you know, I found companionship with these creatures. I did, and I found them to be very moving. And Lon Chaney, for example, I had a very abnormal childhood because I was reading English fluently at age 6. I was completely bilingual, and I read and bought books, anthologies, magazines that were in English, and I came in contact with famous monsters of film, and therefore I came in contact with Lon Chaney, Jack Pierce, all the great makeup guys, Rick Baker. It was a different world, and I felt accepted in there.
What did your parents think about this? Were they a little concerned that little Guillermo was reading all these monster magazines?
Very weird, yeah. Well, they still gave me my allowance. So, you know, that allowed me to finance. They were enablers, I guess, at least. But my like when we were kids, my father and I used to watch a quiz show, and I said, I'm going to participate. And this is when I was like 7 or 8. I said, I'm going to participate with Life and Times of Christopher Lee. And there's a recording of me at age 6 or earlier where I ask, they say, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, I want a mandrake to create a mandrake root to do some witchcraft.
Oh, good. So they had a feeling that little Guillermo wasn't going to be an accountant.
No. I was a very strange kid, yeah.
So when I went into the AGO yesterday, the Art Gallery Ontario, Everything in there is from your own personal collection. Just about. There's a few things there from the museum
Yeah, we
itself.
blended it in. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this house. This is the Bleak House.
Well, ever since I was a kid, I would live mostly, or a good part of my childhood was with my grandmother, and I always was designing secret passages, false doors, sliding bookshelves, and of course I was not financially able to do them. So in 2005, 2006, after Pan's Labyrinth, I said, I'm going to get my own house, separate from the family home, because I want to do a house exactly how I dreamt it when I was a kid. I wanted a rain room, which was a room where it rained 24/7.
And this is in the AGO. You go into this room, Edgar Allan Poe is in a chair.
Yeah,
and
it's a different solution at the AGO than I did. I did a theatrical one,
right,
with rear projection and this and that.
And so it's constantly dark and it's constantly raining.
And there's a surround system with rain. Very good simulation. You actually feel the rain in the roof.
And that's where you write.
That's where I write. Yeah.
Why?
For a Mexican kid, rain is really exotic. It really had sort of a romantic Gothic feel. I love rain. And it was very scarce. And in California, it's equally scarce.
Yeah.
So, I wanted that. I wanted sliding bookshelves. I have a couple. I have a secret passage behind a painting. I have secret passages here and there. And, it is the house I dreamt when I was a kid.
You've said that the Bleak House is, quote, the single thing that I have done that expresses me most completely, more than any of my movies.
Not anymore. I think Shape of Water and this.
You think Shape of Water beats the Bleak House?
Well, Shape is like a summary and a new direction for me. Yeah. So I feel now equally proud. But yes, if you needed to know what goes on in my head, come and visit the house. The house, which is far more Baroque than the exhibition, is 5 times the objects.
When you go into the house, you see statues. Should we call them statues? Wax figurines of Edgar Allan Poe,
life size. Yeah.
H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, life size.
I watch TV with Linda Blair.
So I was going to ask, do you talk to them? How do you interact?
No, I'm not insane.
You're not walking down. I thought you might be going.
Although I must say there is the Schlitzie from Freaks. Whenever I come down the staircase, I do smile. I know it's a statue, but I do smile at Schlitzie.
So you have the Elephant Man, you have the cast of the 1932 film Freaks, Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft. So that was more than anything else. That was the one that made me the most curious.
And Lovecraft.
Yeah. No, these wax figurines.
Well, they are made of silicone and they are incredibly detailed.
And lifelike.
Incredibly lifelike. They are designed and made for the house. So, for example, when you enter the house, Lovecraft is looking at you straight from the library. Then you turn a corner and Hans, the dwarf from Freaks, is watching you with a razor blade. I say it's my alarm system. But what it is literally the trick is to find a thing that works as a research library. This house is really 13 libraries interconnected that I have organized myself. I hang the art, I frame the art, I assemble the bookshelves, I do everything. And what I did is basically find a way to create 13 libraries that were fun and great to do research. I have a history library, I have a biology library, crime, fantasy, fairy tale, legend, blah, blah, blah. And in the middle is the art and the figures that have inspired me or kept me company since I was a kid. So you have paintings or drawings by Edward Gorey, Arthur Rackham, Edmund Dulac, H.R. Giger, Mobius. There's a great variety, but each of the pieces there is put there by me. I think it's in the Mexican soul to make altars. I mean, you give us 10 objects, we make an altar. And that's what I did. I did a giant shrine to my childhood roots. I mean, I think most every artist spends his entire life or her entire life solving the first 10 years of his or her life, because that's the forge in which we are created. And then we spend the rest of our life deciphering, disassembling, and correcting the things that were done wrong when we were kids.
If you're just tuning in, my name is Tom Power. I'm speaking with filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. He's sharing monsters from his huge personal collection in a new Art Gallery of Ontario exhibition called At Home with Monsters. And yeah, they're a really big part of your films. I mean, some directors, though, have seen horror as simply a stepping stone to get somewhere else in cinema. This is not you.
No, for me, it's not a stepping stone. It's a cathedral. I've said this many times because it's taken, the only two genres that I was interested to rephrase and reconstruct, because what I do is not really horror. I don't know what I do, whatever you want to call it, good or bad.
Do you find that term horror kind of limiting?
No, what it is I love the image of the genre, but I'm not interested in the mechanics.
I don't know what you mean.
I'm not interested in the scares, but I'm interested in the atmosphere. And I borrow a lot from fairy tales and fable. So it's a strange mixture. For example, Devil's Backbone is a Civil War movie about a ghost in an orphanage. Pan's Labyrinth is an anti-fascist fairy tale told in post-Civil War Franco regime in Spain. So these are hardly surefire combinations for box office success or things like that. So the genre exists as one element that I'm interested in, and perhaps a predominant one visually, but I'm influenced by so many things that, but nevertheless, what I do and my love of the fantastic, okay, and the love of the dark, because I also would have done noir, and the love of the dark for me is a vocation. And that's why I've been faithful for 25 years of career. It's not a stage. I'm not going to go past it. This is what I do. Now, what I do evolves and has variety, because if you compare Pan's Labyrinth to Pacific Rim, to Shape of Water, to Chronos, there's a latitude in there,
I'm more than anything, I'm more just disappointed you're not going to make that romantic comedy I always just assumed.
Yes.
I just assumed you were going to make.
Where they exchange seeds and they fall in love.
But they have no eyes.
That's a trick.
Matthew McConaughey has no eyes.
That happens to me every time I pitch, quote unquote, a commercial.
Yeah.
Which I've never done one, and I hope never to do one. But every time they say, we hired you because of your vision, blah, 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 and then I pitch it. And in the middle of the pitch, I look at the clients, and they are like, can we get out of here? Can we validate his parking and get him out?
So it's Crest toothpaste, but in the back of the head.
Yes, it's a great shampoo, but it melts your skin. I don't know.
In the exhibition, I want to go back to something you said earlier that really struck me. And this is all throughout the exhibition. And if you're listening to this and you're not necessarily into monsters, I think you might find this interesting, that we should love monsters because they reflect our own imperfections.
Correct. That's what attracted me to them in the first place. I found, being raised Catholic, I felt such unforgiving. There was no leeway. My grandmother explained to me that you were born with original sin. So you already owed a check that you had never cashed. And she said, you're going to go to purgatory. And you're going to spend time in purgatory, which is not quite as bad as hell, but it's very similar.
Yeah,
but I haven't done anything.
Yeah.
So, you feel there's this Kafkian sense of guilt, And then on top of that, if you think about modern times, we are in a paradox where we have super sophisticated social language that makes it almost impossible to be imperfect, because then you are pillared publicly. And at the same time, we are living in an environment where socially we see things that we thought were past, sexual hang-ups, racism, classism, brutal divisions through fear and hatred that you thought were dormant or gone for 50 years. They're coming back. So there's a paradox at play. And the only place that I think that the only place I find refuge and solace and forgiveness is in monsters. Because the monster in itself is an act that is not asking for forgiveness, and it's not acting for, but is there for you to accept.
So, if anything, we are much closer naturally to monsters than we are to perfection.
Than gods, of course. We are we're much further from angels than we are from monsters. And if you think about it, the goal of perfection, none of us can attain. The goal of imperfection, we are all great at it already.
Yeah.
In our own style. And I think there is a very significant moment in Freaks, in Todd Browning's Freaks, which is the good guys are the freaks, and the quote-unquote bad guys are the normal people, again, quote-unquote. And there's a moment in which the freaks chant, "We accept you, one of us, one of us." There is that instant pardon of your deficiencies with monsters, whereas the intolerance of people that believe there is only one way of behaving, one way, one skin color, one single credo. People that are absolutely certain scare me the most.
Wasn't there a quote that like a smart man knows that Frankenstein's monster is Frankenstein's monster? A wise man knows that Frankenstein is the monster.
Yes, of course, it is. That's exactly right. The fact is, you have two men in two quests. One is arrogance. Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, is an arrogant man in a quest for impossibilities. The creature is in a quest for its own soul, its own rationale, its own sense of being, the answers to why is he there, who created him, why does it hurt so much to be alive? These are Miltonian questions, they are monumental, and they are asked by the creature. They're not asked by the doctor. The doctor has such hubris, such a narcissism that he thinks he should control life. And that's why the book opens with the captain of the ship that finds Dr. Frankenstein, and the captain has the same hubris, this sense of grandeur, and at the end of the book, the captain understands the lesson, so to speak, and the monster loses the only human being that he belonged to in some way, and goes away into the fog and the snow.
Well, there's the spoiler now. I can't even read it.
Yeah. Now you know how it is.
I'm only joking.
But to me, it's one of the most beautiful books, and the fact is, it was written by a 19-year-old, so it has all this angst and all the wisdom before you become civilized.
The naivety of youth, so to speak.
And at the same time, the fierceness, because I think that when you're young, you may not know a lot of things, but you are certain, and you have a fierce desire to change the world, and I think that is something you shouldn't lose.
I think that Frankenstein had a large impact on you at a young age.
Huge. It was the first book, a novel I read. I read short stories before, and I read it chiefly because I loved the movies. And then when I read the book, I just wrote the prologue to an annotated version of Frankenstein that Leslie Klinger published a couple of months ago. And when I read that book, first of all, it had very little to do with the movies, really, other than the basic anecdote. But I cried, and I recognized myself so fully in there. And then I reviewed the movies, and the Boris Karloff's performance acquired new meaning because I saw many gestures he was doing. The movie, Frankenstein, is a collaboration, even if James Whale, the director, would hate to admit it. Karloff brought so much to that creature.
So that, and the centerpiece of the exhibition at the AGO is the centerpiece of your house, this gigantic bust of Frankenstein's head. What do you feel when you walk in through the door and you look at that?
It's a 6-foot Frankenstein head, incredibly detailed, hyper-realistic. And like Ron Mueck or Evan Penny, all the sculptors that work in big scale, the sculptor Mike Hill had a reason to do it. He said, look, by now, the face of the creature has been domesticated into being in cartoons, in cereal boxes. People forget.
Right.
They forget the impact that it was to be in a theater and see a 6-7 foot tall face of that creature peering at you. So he did this gigantic sculpture to remind people of the power of that face,
My final question to you is, these objects and statues in this house, you've said are spiritual to you. They remind you of your humanity. They remind you of the quest of what is actually humanity, how we can all be better, how we need to embrace sometimes being worse. What's it like being separated from so much of your work, of so many of these pieces?
I miss them. I do miss them. In fact, there have been offers from other museums in Asia, in Europe, to take the exhibition there, and I just want my stuff back. I want it back. I'll do one more exhibition of the stuff, but I'll curate it differently for Mexico, for my own country, because I want it to be, I want more objects and different objects to travel.
What do you mean?
Well, when I would favor Mexican illustrators. For example, there's a guy called Ernesto Garcia Cabral, who I have one piece, but I have 3 pieces in the house. I would favor him. I would favor an engraver called Julio Ruelas, who is Mexican, and I would curate it differently. I would favor Mexican comic books, blah blah blah.
Right.
And the thing that the exhibit tries to reconcile, I think, the exhibit is about reconciliation of your imperfection, and one of those reconciliations is to reconcile that we can be equally inspired by high art or low art. That you can find inspiration in a comic book or a pop TV program or a movie without going into the fan realm, not consuming it just blindly. You can repurpose it to a higher form, and the same, you can find cues on fine art that you can bring to much more practical use in storytelling and so forth.
Guillermo del Toro, thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
I hope you get your stuff back soon.
Me too, and I hope they don't break anything.
I hope you can make a shampoo commercial, because you can't make it. You can't make it without that stuff in there.
It'll melt the skin.
That was filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. The new Art Gallery of Ontario exhibit Guillermo del Toro at Home with Monsters, featuring some of his extensive collection of monsters, opens September 30th. Also, some really amazing Canadian art in there as well. Have you got a chance to see any of that yet?
Yeah. And we commingled with Goya. We commingled with an engraver called Piranesi. Well, there's really beautiful art that is seamlessly blended.
That you can, you know what? They will, you can just take that with you when you go.
Listen, that was my plan. Are you going to need this after I leave?
Guillermo, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, man.
He joined me here in our Q studio.